After getting into Ma Heng's car, Gao Tu never made it home. The young Omega slipped into unconsciousness, his fragile body unable to withstand the storm of pheromones tearing through his system.
Ma Heng, his childhood friend, panicked but acted fast.
Without hesitation, he sped through the night, heading to the nearest hospital.
The air in the car was thick with the overpowering scent of sage. Gao Tu's pheromones burning out of control, suffocating and desperate.
By the time they reached Yi City's small hospital, Gao Tu's condition had already spiraled into something terrifying. 2 hours later, sirens screamed through the night.
An ambulance carrying Gao Tu raced out of Yi City, heading to the most authoritative pheromone hospital in the provincial capital.
He had suffered multiple cardiac arrests, and every second was a gamble with death. Inside the ambulance, the scene was unbearable. The pheromone glands on the back of his neck had swollen into a horrifying, fist-sized lump. Blue veins pulsed violently beneath his thin skin, like a grotesque rhythm of life about to be extinguished. The doctors could only watch as his body betrayed him, drowning itself in the very scent that once defined who he was. The sterile emergency room filled with sage. But this wasn't the gentle fragrance of life it once symbolized.
It was heavy, suffocating, an overwhelming flood of pheromones so strong that even the beta doctors struggled to breathe.
They became restless, unsettled, their instincts clawing at them. 2 Omega doctors broke down in tears while performing emergency procedures. They weren't just treating a patient. They were watching a tragedy unfold. Gao Tu's biochemical indicators were chaos. His glands were overproducing pheromones far beyond human limits, yet the concentration in his blood had plummeted. His body was cannibalizing itself, and in the middle of this nightmare, he was pregnant. The doctors knew what this meant.
They weren't fighting for just one life.
They were fighting for 2. But Yi City was too small, too unequipped to handle a case like this. The director of the pheromone department made the hardest decision. He called the provincial capital, begged for a green channel, and sent Gao Tu away that very night. Time was running out. 20 minutes from the hospital, the scent of sage began to weaken. It wasn't relief, it was death creeping in. Gao Tu lay motionless on the ventilator, pale and drenched in sweat. His once vibrant glands now beat weakly, slower and slower. The patient's blood pressure is dropping. Abnormal heartbeat, prepare to intervene. The ambulance felt like a coffin on wheels, carrying a young father and his unborn child toward a fate no one could predict. By the time they arrived at the provincial hospital,
every specialist available had been summoned: pheromone experts, obstetricians, emergency staff.
For 4 agonizing hours, they fought.
His heart stopped.
Then it started again. Then it stopped once more.
Each time the line went flat, it felt like a cruel rehearsal for the end. And yet, he clung on. Against every odd, Gao Tu's vital signs finally stabilized.
He wasn't safe, not yet, but for the moment he was alive. And so was his baby. The child inside him was impossibly strong, implanting itself firmly within his reproductive cavity, clinging desperately to life even as its parent's body collapsed. Every beat of Gao Tu's failing heart, every drop of nutrient in his weakening body, the baby seized and held on to like a lifeline. It was heartbreaking. It was brutal. It was survival in its rawest form. When the doors to the emergency room finally opened, Ma Heng stood waiting, eyes red from hours of silent terror. He watched as the doctors pushed out the stretcher. His friend, the little rabbit he grew up with, looked nothing like the boy he remembered. Gao Tu's forehead glistened with cold sweat. His face was pale as a sheet, drained of color.
Around his neck, a rigid fixator clamped him in place, preventing his body from convulsing under the unbearable pain.
The doctors had cut directly into his swollen pheromone gland, implanting an artificial barrier to contain the flood. He looked broken, fragile like a porcelain doll barely held together. Ma Heng's chest tightened. Tears burned his eyes, but he couldn't let them fall. Not now. The pheromone doctor's words cut through the air like knives. He needs an alpha. The meaning was brutal. Not artificial substitutes, not drugs. He needed a living alpha to stabilize him. But Gao Tu had never mentioned his alpha. Not once. Silence filled the corridor. The truth was as heavy as stone. Then get a new one, the doctor snapped, urgency in his voice. Ma Heng froze. He wanted to God, he wanted to. He turned to the doctor, voice trembling.
What about me? What do the compatibility tests say between me and Gao Tu?
Can I be his soothing pheromone donor? The doctor flipped through the results.
At last, a glimmer of hope. Your compatibility is over 65%.
It qualifies. Ma Heng's relief was bitter.
65% wasn't love. It wasn't destiny. But it was survival. Still, there was one problem. Gao Tu was in a coma. He couldn't give consent.
Only his family could. When Gao Qing, Gao Tu's sister, finally arrived in Jinling, she collapsed into a chair outside the IKU. Her face was streaked with tears and fury. When she saw Ma Heng, she forced herself to ask, "What did the doctor say?" He lied through his trembling smile. "The little rabbit and I are barely a match. They said he'll get better." "Don't worry." But Ma Heng knew the truth. This wasn't just about matching. This was about saving a life, no matter what it cost. Compatibility was cruel.
Science said that anything above 50% created natural goodwill between an alpha and omega.
But love wasn't numbers on a page. Couples who burned with passion often tested above 75. Some romantic fools rejected testing altogether, believing that pure love defied laboratories and charts. But love couldn't save Gao Tu now. Only science could. And yet, even science was a gamble. 30 years ago, a high-ranking alpha had tried to genetically modify his omega to force compatibility. The results were disastrous. Love turned into possession. Bodies broke under experiments. Compatibility couldn't be manufactured. It was something written in their blood. Now, in the cold, humming halls of Jinling Hospital, Gao Tu was nothing more than an experiment of fate. His life hanging by a thread, his unborn child depending on him to survive. His childhood friends standing at his side, desperate to take on a role that fate had never chosen him for.
The little rabbit almost died.
His child almost died.
And still, the story wasn't finished. Because as Gao Tu lay motionless,
machines breathing for him, and doctors struggling to find balance between life and death, one truth lingered above all. He needed an alpha. He needed someone who could anchor him, calm the storm in his broken body, and keep the fragile light inside him burning. Without it, both he and his child would fade into nothing. This was the brutal truth of Gao Tu's battle for survival. A young Omega, betrayed by his own body, nearly lost his life and the tiny heartbeat inside him. Do you think fate will save him, or will tragedy strike again? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you were as heartbroken as I was, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more ABO stories.